Good afternoon, everyone. TJ Sharp here with Dell Technologies. We'll give it another minute here and let people join, and then we'll get underway. Appreciate you joining today. All right, let's go ahead and get kicked off here. Welcome, everyone. TJ Sharp with Dell Technologies. We're excited about the webinar today. We're excited about the synergy between our two companies, Semperis and Dell. We know cybersecurity is at the top of everyone's mind, and today's threats have no geographic boundary. Today, we're excited to have Sean Deuby with us. Sean brings 30 years experience in enterprise IT and hybrid identity to his role of Director of Services at Semperis. He was one of the original architects of technical leader of Intel Active Directory. Sean's a 15-time Microsoft MVP and has been involved with Microsoft Identity Technology since its inception. Welcome, Sean, and thank you for spending the time with us today. Take it away, sir.
Thanks, TJ. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for making it on I guess we're on a Tuesday here. Hopefully you'll find this worth your time. As you can see from the title of the seminar, I'll be talking about a little bit about ransomware, focusing on risk and the recovery, which is something that's always important when you have a mindset for what's going on with ransomware, what you should do about it. As TJ said, I'll spare you the details. I spent a lot of time with AD. He's already sort of talked about it, but a lot of time with big enterprise IT for Intel, but also a lot of time as a consultant, as doing both on-premises and hybrid consulting around Azure Active Directory and all that sort of thing. And a lot of time writing. I spent a lot of time as a journalist and sort of an analyst in the area. So I've had the opportunity to really see the space and where it's gone over the last 20 years. I think if you have to pull some sort of a core piece of information out of this webinar, or one of the things to carry away with you as you leave the webinar, is first to recognize that, if you don't already recognize that, Active Directory really is at the core of your hybrid enterprise. And you may think that it is protected as well as it can be protected, but that may not be the case. And this is the area that's part of what this is all about, is to help you maybe expose you to some of these areas and have you think about it a little bit further. So what I want to do first is give you sort of three different propositions that make a logical whole. I think it's really should be pretty clear, but let's lay it out. The first is that identity is central to modern security. We are seeing this more and more being said more and more often. I've been going to identity conferences for many years, and they used to be just these one group small off in the corner now, and now it is a major deal. So Identiverse, for example, is coming up on June 21st, and they're when it was all held in person, and this year it's a hybrid event, there are 1,200, 1,500 people are going, and it's all focused on identity. Microsoft says identity is a new control plane. You know, if you look at any Microsoft stuff there, you'll always see that come up. Gartner says that identity is central to providing appropriate, accurate, and secure access to data, services, and systems. And Forrester says the same thing, essentially saying that identity is a core building block of a robust zero trust security ecosystem and infrastructure. And you just can check off one thing in your buzzword bingo, because I said zero trust. The second aspect of it is that what we're seeing in the industry and across the environment, whether it be large enterprise, whether it be medium-sized enterprise, and lots and lots of state and local government as well, is that hybrid is the dominant identity architecture. If you recall, when cloud came up, all of a sudden it was, boom, everything's public cloud. And then it went, no, everything should be private cloud. And of course, what happens is we reach the middle ground of this hybrid cloud configuration where you have both cloud resources, but of course you haven't thrown your on-premises resources, out in the trash either, not at all. So what you have is the world where most organizations' identity systems certainly are on premises. You may have more and more, we're seeing cloud-based HR systems, but typically what they do is they provision into an on-premises identity system. Then on the other side of the coin, you have productivity suites and SaaS applications such as Office 365 or, Google Cloud, or you name it, Salesforce, et cetera, et cetera. Prevalent in the industry, especially Microsoft 365, Microsoft subscriptions. So to do that, to make that secure, you have to have a hybrid identity environment where you project on-premises identities, such as Active Directory, into a cloud service. And then with that, you get a secure single sign-on onto these cloud services using your corporate credentials, rather than having multiple sets of credentials everywhere. Now, it's really remarkable that Active Directory has done as well as it has, since the technology is 21, even 22 years old. It's proved unbelievably robust for, especially in IT timeframes, where you see technologies rise and fall so often. Gartner came up with the hype cycle just to talk about that. So the hype cycle for Active Directory was probably before there was a hype cycle for Gartner, and yet it still powers most of the enterprise. But when AD was designed, that's not a situation that developers, this world that we're in right now, isn't something that the Active Directory developers could have possibly foretold what it would be like. And so, of course, Active Directory is vulnerable in ways that its creators couldn't have predicted. The third aspect then is that Active Directory is central to hybrid identity. 93% of the Fortune 1000 rely on Active Directory. And when you take that plus the hybrid scenario of projecting Active Directory identities into the cloud, and if you think about it, most cloud identity services are not unique identities that only exist in the cloud. They come from on-premises, and they have been generated into the cloud because they come from on-premises. Now, there are certainly on cloud-only identities, but I would posit that most of them, that they're in the minority. The vast majority are created from on-premises. So what you actually have is that Active Directory is central to modern security. In fact, it is more important than it has ever been, because its footprint, its scope of influence is larger than it has ever been in its history. So I want to throw out a poll question out here under use of Active Directory. So let me see if I can get this going correctly. And so the question is, which of the following best describes your company's use of Microsoft AD? And I'll give just a few seconds for people to put some comments in there. This is always very interesting. As I watch it being influenced real time, the winner on here, and not even close, is what, for it to settle down a little bit more. I think we're probably pretty close here. Looks like we've settled out. Okay, so what we have here is 80%. 80% is of you folks are saying that Active Directory is our primary identity store, and 20% says not only is it our primary identity store, it's our only identity store. So that's of course that mirrors what we're seeing in the enterprise as well. very, 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 very interesting to see that kind of a result. So let's talk then about Active Directory and where it fits in for risk right now. So if you work in risk at all, this is and this is especially around security professionals. This is a what's called a risk matrix, and it's very simple. You only have so many. You only have so much money that you can use to defend against how many threats are out there. There's an infinite number of threats out there, and you can only defend against a certain amount with a certain bucket of money. So what you do is you have to have a risk matrix where on the x-axis you put the impact of what a particular threat would be, and the y-axis is what is the probability of that threat happening. So in other words, as you can quite plainly see, the red stuff is the things that you have to prioritize because it's both the highest impact and the highest degree of probability. Now, in a classic scenario, what you have are things like power failures outside data centers, or natural disasters, or perhaps network issues. But this is why power failure is why you, outside of every data center, you'll see diesel generators or battery banks. Or natural disasters, that's why you see multiple data centers. So if you have a data center in Houston, you're probably going to have a data center that's someplace else that's outside of hurricane range. Classic, risk matrix that explains where you want to put your money. But what's changed, and as everybody that is attending this knows, is that the landscape has changed. What used to be the highest threats are no longer the highest threats. They have been pushed down by denial of availability malware attacks. So this is just I updated this just a couple days ago. This changes on such a daily basis, and this particular, there are so many that this is actually focused on state and local government and educational institutions with some others. I mean, you can pick and choose what you want it to be, but look at what we have. 2019, 20 Texas agencies attacked. May 8th of 2020, the Texas Office of Court Administration, so that the Texas courts, took them over 2 months to recover. Department of Transportation, 1 week later, was hit. Texas school districts, there are more than 4, but those are the 4 most prominent ones. Buffalo, New York, their public schools were hit just last month. Broward County in Florida was hit this month, and the threat actors asked them or demanded $40 million of ransom from from a public school district. And you can see in the transcripts the negotiators are saying, "Are you crazy? This is a school district. Where do you think that this sort of money is coming from?" So they counteroffered, and they got it down to like $500,000. And I think they refused to go any further. And so the threat actors published 26,000 files, although I'm told that they were not particularly sensitive files in an effort to get them to pony up for it. An average of almost $19 billion in 2020 recovery costs and downtime. And I just came across this very little interesting factlet. So the average ransomware payout in the first quarter of this year is up 43% over what they charged in the fourth quarter of last year. So this is clearly the highest level of threat that we care about. And when you rejuggle the risk matrix based on this, what you have is denial of availability of malware, number 1, because it is clearly the most probable thing that's bad that's going to happen to you. And it is also clearly the highest impact because of what it can do across the company. I like to describe it as the geography for a ransomware attack or a malware attack is not the physical geography of the company. It is the network geography of the company. So in terms of different data centers and all that, in and of themselves, the physical data centers don't make any difference. The malware spreads very, very quickly. So what you then have is, because of this matrix and because of the nature of the way Active Directory is designed, you have Active Directory in the attacker's crosshairs. As our poll just showed, that Active Directory is a mission critical data store, an identity store, or your only identity store. And you've certainly heard it said Active Directory is the keys to the kingdom. Well, it's not just the keys to the kingdom. It's also the treasure map to the data, because once you understand where things are, Active Directory is designed to make it easy to find network resources. Once you're on a domain join client, you have the ability to easily query and find where resources are. So if an attacker is in your network, they can do the same sorts of queries that legitimate users can do to find where your databases are, to find where your important information is stored. So not in addition to that, it's also the pathway to spread the malware if they so choose, because Active Directory quite conveniently has this thing called group policy, which is designed to, among other things, to distribute software if you so choose. So you can use that to distribute software for ill as well as for good. My colleague, Darren Marilia, does webinars on group policy. He's probably the world's foremost expert on group policy. And he gives webinars on how you can do that for good and for evil, and how to protect against and how to guard against and look for the potential of evil being done with group policy. 57% of a survey that we did a couple of years ago, about 200 organizations, have said that an Active Directory outage would have severe or catastrophic impact. And if you look at the companies that I have listed here, and you read their breach reports, or you read the news or comments from the company about their attacks and what has happened to them, they don't specifically point out Active Directory, but what they do is they say things that were Active Directory related. So things like, oh, the bad actor enumerated network shares to find vulnerabilities, or they compromised credentials here, or they looked for service accounts that had weak passwords. All of this is Active Directory related. When my company looks at defense against malware attacks, we look at the cybersecurity framework, the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is what much of the U.S. is now using to help position their IT services against attacks. And it makes sense. It's very straightforward when you look at what it does. The framework basically says, identify the risk against your service or against your organization. Protect the service against the threats. I'm sorry, this is identify the threats against your organization or your particular service. Protect the service against those threats. Detect the threats or the attacks that come from those threats in process. Respond to the attack, and then finally recover from the attack. So when you're looking at, so we just ended up, I'm going to kind of go backwards a little bit. Let's talk about after an attack, the recovery part of the attack. And this is specifically near and dear to Active Directory, and specifically a cyber first disaster recovery, as I said, not a physical disaster, not a geographic related disaster, but a network related disaster. Let me ask you, when is the last time you've tested your AD disaster recovery process? I'm going to put up a poll here. Let's see, and let's launch that up. When is the last time you tested your disaster recovery process? Do you have a plan? Did you have a plan created? Was it tested? Or are you part of are you in that unlucky minority that has actually had to do a recovery within the last year or so? Okay, we are settling out here. And this seems to be, this looks pretty accurate. I see there is one organization, two organizations have had to do some work. Let me share this out. Okay. I'll end the poll and I'll share the results. So what we see in the results are approximately 62% have created a plan but never tested it or have no plan created. 13% have tested within the last 6 months, and an unlucky 13% has actually had to perform an actual forced recovery from a production outage in the last within the last 12 months. And this is the key to this aspect that I'm talking about, is the actual forced recovery, the actual disaster recovery process for Active Directory. This is something that you never want to see and will ruin your day pretty quickly. This looks like a ransomware attack, but it is not actually a ransom attack. This is what is displayed on the screen of a PC that has been essentially destroyed, encrypted and destroyed by NotPetya. So NotPetya is the Russian cyber weapon that was unleashed in 2017 and went around the world and caused massive amounts of damage within a matter of hours. Now, the best known story around NotPetya comes from Maersk. So Maersk is the world's largest shipping company. 1/5 of all of the traffic in container ships around the world go on the Maersk line, those gigantic container ships. This particular picture here is of the Brooklyn, New York Maersk terminal. And it is a square mile in size, and ships the size of the Empire State Building, these container ships, come up to these terminals, and thousands of containers are loaded onto them or unloaded off of them, and as they come and they go. So in the spring of 2017, well, and actually before that, let me give you a little background. And we're seeing it again now, is that Russia and Ukraine have been at war for many years. Sometimes blows a little cold, sometimes very hot. Both kinetic warfare, as one genteelly puts it, when people are actually shooting at each other, but also, and not quite so well known, cyber warfare. And specifically cyber warfare of Russia against Ukraine. So Russia sort of uses Ukraine as its test bed for its cyber weapons to do psychological and real damage to the company, to the country. They've done it to their physical infrastructure, to their power generators, their ATM system, their governments, all of that. So in the spring of 2017, Russia had crafted a cyber weapon, which the world knows as NotPetya, and they took advantage of a couple of zero-day exploits that were snuck out of the NSA, and this is very Active Directory focused. And they took the weapon and they put it in the supply chain for Ukraine. And this is really the very first supply chain attack, the first major supply chain attack that you've, of course, heard of from SolarWinds. So there is a tax software program in Ukraine called MEDOC. It's like the TurboTax of tax software. As everybody that does business in Ukraine, or most companies that do business in Ukraine, use MEDOC to do their taxes and report their taxes to the Ukrainian government. And like many software nowadays, MEDOC updates from the company's servers. You can get automatic updates. So what Russia did, specifically the SVR, military, an army branch of their intelligence service, the SVR infiltrated NotPetya into the update servers for the MEDOC software program. So hundreds and hundreds of computers across the country went out to MEDOC to get their update software, excuse me, and downloaded NotPetya. And within minutes, the PCs were encrypted, and everything that those PCs could touch were encrypted. Now, because Maersk does business in the Ukraine, they do business in Ukraine on the Black Sea, and so they have an office in Odessa on the Black Sea. One of their PCs had MEDOC on it because they have to file taxes in Ukraine. That MEDOC piece of software was updated. NotPetya gained administrative rights into their Active Directory domain as a result. And 7 minutes later, NotPetya had destroyed 55,000 devices on their worldwide network. It destroyed 146 of 147 of their domain controllers. So it encrypts them, making it look like ransomware, but there is no decryption key. So it makes the data inaccessible and completely useless. So it took down all of their Active Directory that was online at that minute, and 1,200 of their line of business and other critical applications, all offline within minutes. The eyewitness accounts of it are truly scary to see what they had to say as everything spread. So what actually happened then is the IT department called all around the world to try to find a domain controller that was not destroyed by NotPetya. And they finally found one in Ghana, Africa, in Accra. They have a branch office there in Ghana. And the only reason that domain controller was not destroyed is because the office was down due to a power failure. So they found that this one domain controller was okay, and they said, no, don't put it back on the network. They had the administrator there drive 250 miles with the disk drives from this domain controller to Lagos, Nigeria, where he handed it to a system administrator in Lagos that had a visa to be able to go to England, which is where Maersk's IT headquarters is. And that system administrator in Lagos got a free ride on Maersk's Gulfstream G450 jet from Nigeria to Gatwick, England, and then a short, but I'm sure a very fast ride to Maidenhead, which is where the Maersk's IT headquarters are. And they began the process to rebuild Active Directory for the whole company from that one set of disk drives. It ended up taking them 9 days to rebuild Active Directory. And the first domain controller that was rebuilt on it was a Surface Pro 4, was their seed domain controller for their New Forest before they started to build it out. It's estimated that Maersk lost $350 million, not counting all of the suppliers and all of the supply chain, the unbelievable supply chain ripple, because everything runs just in time nowadays. Not as well known, not Maersk, but Merck, the pharmaceutical company, was estimated to have lost $900 million, and worldwide, $10 billion. Last month, Brad Smith testified to Congress on the SolarWinds intrusion, and he described NotPetya. He said, NotPetya is what havoc looks like. So the really showing the disruptive and catastrophic potential of what can happen in a situation like that. And the reality is, and this mirrors this mirrors almost perfectly what our poll today has shown, is that more than 50% of the people that responded, the organizations that responded to our survey, have never tested their AD disaster recovery process, or they don't even have one. So don't feel bad. You are in good company with the knowledge of that. And here we have 60%, so pretty good. And on top of that, organizations more broadly don't understand the complexity of forest recovery and how difficult it is to do that. if you've got to do an Active Directory forest recovery, it is very, very complicated. People that work with Active Directory know this, and they're very well aware of it. But if you're not an Active Directory expert, if you don't spend time in Active Directory, it's not at all clear. I have 2 slides that talk about this very, very briefly. I'm not going into the details, but here are some of the questions that you'd have to have answered when you get a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and you found out that your Active Directory has been attacked and it's encrypted. And if you actually have to do the forced recovery process, because you can't necessarily trust your backups. So in a cyber attack, remember, the malware has been sitting in your environment for weeks or months, almost certainly, before the payload is detonated, as the bad actors are in there exfiltrating data or searching for things that they want, either for ransomware or to get more for it. It's very, very difficult to do it. And in a situation where time is great money, it's very, it is probably the most stressful actions that you'll have in your IT career. What my company, Semperis, does is we focus on protecting against these circumstances. Semperis, which is short for Semper Paratus, which means always ready, and it's also actually the Coast Guard, Coast Guard's maxim as well, is about identity-driven cyber resilience and threat mitigation. So we take this recovery process. There's 28 steps to it across multiple threads, across multiple data centers, and all at a time when everybody is running around like crazy, waiting to make mistakes that will cause you to start it all over again. We have the ability to restore your Active Directory cleanly without restoring any malware that's been sitting on the operating system, to do it rapidly with advanced automation, because we do it in a multi-threaded process where every domain controller can be recovered at the same time, and also give you the ability to not have to recover back to that same domain controller, which may well have malware sitting on it, but instead you can create new servers in a virtualized environment. Especially, you can create new servers very quickly and recover to those new servers, recover your domain controller to those new servers that you know they don't have any malware on them. Very simply, what ADFR does is we simply back up Active Directory all by itself. We don't back up the operating system the way a system state backup or a bare metal recovery does. And because we don't back up the operating system, we don't back up the malware that's been sitting on the operating system. And because we're not backing up the hardware abstraction layer that it ties the backups to the particular hardware that was backed up, that allows us to recover to different scenarios. So you could, on your on-premises virtualization environment, you could create new VMs, point your backups to those VMs, and bring them back very, very quickly. Instead of, even if you were of that small percentage that had done all of this work, you can bring those back in a matter of minutes or a matter of an hour or so, your entire forest from a recent backup. We keep it very, very simple. It's 3 big buttons and a few clicks beyond that to actually recover your environment. Other aspects of Active Directory that has been hit in a cybercrime environment you may not get to the tail end of this, the disaster recovery part, but intruders in your Active Directory actually looking around. So you need to be able to position the protection of your Active Directory before they get in, and when they're in there, to be able to see changes that are made into AD. There's been a lot of talk in the first part of this year about, of course, the SolarWinds attack and also the Hafnium attack. What is not really well known, and SolarWinds has taken the brunt of that certainly, but what is not known, that a significant percentage of these SolarWinds related attacks actually didn't have the SolarWinds Orion software in it. They got in, the bad guys got in through Active Directory itself. They did attacks, well-known attack techniques like credential stuffing for weak passwords, or password spray attacks for weak passwords. They went where it was easy to go. You know, the bad guys are always going to go where it's easiest to go. The same thing for Hafnium. So well known that Hafnium attack group attacked on-premises Microsoft Exchange servers with zero-day exploits against these Exchange servers. They used that to gain initial access and put in back doors into the organizations. But the next step in their attack chain is to attack Active Directory and then spread through Active Directory as what has become the standard mode of attack. So before an attack related to Active Directory, what you want to look at are vulnerability assessments. How vulnerable, how large is the attack surface on your Active Directory? If your AD has been around as long as most Active Directory instances have been around, 10, 15 years, the attack surface just grows. It doesn't get smaller. People always need, oh, I have to have domain admin rights to install this piece of software. And you don't want to take the trouble to figure out exactly what is the least privilege installation to do that. And then, of course, nobody wants them ripped out. So you have domain admins grow all over the place. You have other privileged users grow all over the place. And so your attack surface gets larger and larger and larger. And this is where you find indicators of exposure and indicators of compromise, where you can first initially evaluate them and then continuously evaluate them to make sure that things don't get worse over time. Our Directory Services Protector product is designed to help you in that regard. We do a continuous vulnerability assessment we're now up to 65 different indicators in Active Directory that are indicators of exposure, whether or not you have too many administrators, whether or not your service account passwords haven't been changed recently, if you have accounts that have DC sync enabled that you didn't know were enabled. We look at it very, very comprehensively, and we give you a score and the ability to zoom into each one and look at what the issue is and fix those issues. During the attack, you need to have visibility in what is happening in your Active Directory while it's happening real time. Directory Service Protector gives you the ability to see all of the changes that are happening in Active Directory as they are being made, because we monitor the same replication stream that Active Directory monitors itself. The same stream of changes that all the domain controllers use to update each other. When a user is created on one DC, that update goes to all of the other DCs. Directory Service Protector looks at it. We see the same thing and we report it, and it's not alterable. The attackers can't change it, they can't remove it, because that's the source of truth of what's happening in Active Directory. So what we have is a running stream of all of the changes that have been made in AD. So I can tell you, for example, if I zoom in on this, if I can zoom in on it, maybe I can't zoom in on it. But so for example, we'll see here where we have a user's description has been changed from staff cook to you've been pwned. We see here where you have a user, and this is actually evidence of what's called a DC shadow attack here, where a user named bad actor has gone in and into a regular user and changed their SID history and injected the domain administrator's SID in this user's SID history. This is, if you're an AD person, you'll know what this is all about. If you're not an AD person, the summary is that bad actor here has just inserted a backdoor into Active Directory that gives this user domain admin rights without appearing to be a domain administrator. But we see it in DSP because we see everything that changes in Active Directory. So all it takes to roll that back or anything else in here back is to check the checkbox here and then say undo, and that change will roll back. You can do that manually, or you can also do that automatically. Finally, for a one-time analysis of this, we have recently come up with a free tool called Purple Knight. And what Purple Knight does is a one-time security evaluation of your Active Directory environment, seeing what your security posture is, looking for those indicators. It doesn't do it continuously, it does it at one time. And it will show you, it will give you a score for what it looks like. It is designed to be very, very simple to use. It doesn't require any privileges at all. You can put it on a domain joined, it needs to go on a domain joined client, but the account that it runs from does not have to have administrative rights or elevated rights of any kind in the domain. It doesn't even need to have elevated rights on the client itself. It looks at Active Directory in the way that an attacker would look at Active Directory to search for vulnerabilities, only it's doing it for you as a good guy. So if you look at purple-night.com, you can request an evaluation of it, and our security experts will help you with the evaluation, help you evaluate the results. It's very, very simple. I have I've got a client right here, and all you have to do is unzip Purple Night and run it locally. We don't send anything up to Semperis or anything else. It's all very self-contained in the folder that you created in. You run the results. You will see that it ran 64. It has 64 different indicators of compromise. It gives you a nice overview showing my total score and broken down in some level of detail. And if you view the full report, where's my full report? Let me bring it up here. Is it where it is? Here we are. If you bring the full report, it lists, for example, the most important critical indicators of exposure in here. So for example, I mentioned the DC shadow attack. Here is an example of a DC shadow attack. It drills down, it gives you description, likelihood of compromise, who did it, the remediation steps to take, the level of severity, and we put everything back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework category. So all of these are recognized and fit in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We're also adding for the ANSI framework as well. So you can see all of these tests and with the different indicators sorted by warning and how important they are. And you can just choose any of them and you can find out, oh, look, here are inactive enabled administrator accounts, which is a place that someone can use to break in. So last poll question for you here. And this is what I describe as ransomware's personal impact. And these are entirely anonymous. I have no idea here, just wanting to let you know here. So the question is, for you personally involved in all of this, how has the threat of a cyber attack on your company affected you personally? What is the stress level like for trying to keep up on this, ensuring that things are as protected as best you can in the knowledge that maybe you'd like it to be better because the situation is never getting any easier. We're dancing around quite a bit here and looks like we're starting to settle out. Okay, we'll call it right about now. And let's see what we have. So sharing the results. So we have my stress level was increasing and I'm concerned that my reputation or career would be damaged if we were hit by a cyber attack, which is, we spend a lifetime or a career time building a reputation. And yeah, that's not something that you want to, it's not something that you ever want to have. I like to think of it as IT people spend the significant amount of their time making sure that everything stays green and that everything is not stressful. And this has thrown a monkey wrench into it to make it that much harder to do what you need to do and to keep management off your back, because you certainly don't intend to do that. So as a summary and as call to action, what I would ask for you to pay attention to is to look at your Active Directory cyber disaster preparedness, specifically around forced recovery, and forced recovery in that situation where you don't feel like you can trust the operating system that was backed up because the malware is sitting on that operating system. And then, the flexibility of recovery scenarios, because as I said, when everybody is running around with their hair on fire, what you want is options. You want options to be able to recover to here, recover to there, and whatever it is, to be able to do it very quickly. Secondly, review your ability to protect and remediate Active Directory. The ability to see what is your security posture right now. Where are the indicators of exposure that the bad guys will be looking at as well as you? Find out what they are ahead of time, prioritize closing them out to make your Active Directory that much harder to attack. And then monitoring AD for changes that you don't want made, unauthorized changes. And by the way, this also accounts for what we would call administrative oops as well. Oops, I didn't mean to delete that OU, or oops, I didn't mean to delete that service account or change that service account password. But somebody being added to domain admins, bells and whistles, automatically take it, roll it back. Make sure that that never happens again. Finally, let's leave you with this thought from the Maersk CISO, Andy Powell. He says, 9 days for an Active Directory recovery isn't good enough. You should aspire to 24 hours. If you can't, then you can't repair anything else, because we know Active Directory is central to modern security. So thank you. Thanks for listening. I'm just going to check to see if we have any questions or anything like that at the end of our discussion here. I'm happy to talk about this. This has been my environment and my career as I've come full circle back to protecting Active Directory.
Sean, this is TJ. I didn't see any questions in the chat, sir, but I do have one question for you here.
Sure.
Can ADFR store backups locally on the domain controllers? And if so, you know how many?
Sure. So ADFR, as we say, it functions as a forced recovery process. And by default, we store a backup, one copy of the backup on a domain controller itself. And then we store backups in other locations. We have a concept of what's called a distribution point, which is sort of like a file server that you store in the environment. And you can also store other places in the environment as well. We don't emphasize the fact that there's a copy of the backup on one of the domain controllers, because if you are in a ransomware or in a malware scenario, you don't trust the operating system. So you don't trust the domain controller may have been encrypted or otherwise destroyed, or there may be malware sitting on the operating system. So you don't know if you can trust the backup that was sitting in that box or not. So when we focus on forced recovery processes, we put our backups on these distribution points or on the management server in a very scalable method. So when we take a backup, the first thing that happens is you'll have a backup on one of the domain controllers, and then it is automatically moved to a distribution point in the same data center or in another data center, and then even automatically a copy job to copy that backup to another data center as well, to give you some geographic fault tolerance around your backups. So the answer, long-winded answer, is by default, there is one copy on there. You can put more local copies on there if you want, but we don't depend on local copies because we don't depend on that domain controller still being up and working.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions out there for Sean?
Hey, Sean, this is Brian. One of the questions that we get a lot is asking about, hey, I have Veeam or I have Commvault as my backup. Is this something that replaces that or complements that? How do they work together? Kind of a question.
Sure, and I think the real description of that, of the difference in that, is that ADFR is a recovery product. It is specifically focused on forced recovery. So the Veeams and the Commvaults and all that, they are backing up the servers that are the domain controllers. They're backing up the domain controllers, they're backing up the servers. And so essentially what's happening is it's backing up all of this, and Active Directory is just coming along for the ride. So everything that was sitting on there, including any malware that's been sitting on there, because the dwell time for a piece of malware in an environment before it's detonated is anywhere from 30 to 90 days. So you don't know how long the malware has been on there. So if you do a recovery, you have to then piece apart and hope that what you've recovered, the malware is not on there. The difference is that we are laser focused on just backing up Active Directory itself. So we just back up the DIT file, the log file, sys file, and the registry hives. So we don't bring any of the operating system as a conventional backup does. So you stand up a fresh version of the operating system. You spin up a new virtual machine from a template. There's no malware on that. You point the recovery to that fresh virtual machine, and we bring back all of your domain controller. We bring back the Active Directory bits. If you've got DNS, we've got DNS on there. Any of the other roles that were on there, even the name, it comes back just the way it was. But you can trust the operating system on it because you just created it fresh, and then we applied Active Directory on top of it.
Awesome, thanks.
Well, thanks very much for your time. We'll give you a couple of minutes to get back. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I was just going to close out here. That was awesome, man. I appreciate the time, and thanks to everyone who's participating. As Sean mentioned, everyone will be receiving the Semperis Purple Knight tool. In the next couple of days, Dell Semperis teams will be reaching out to provide you a link for that complimentary access. Be on the lookout for that. Following you running the actual program, we'll have to kind of do potential next steps and further explore how together we can help secure your active environment. So be on the lookout for that. I just want to thank everybody again one more time for your time. I know time is valuable these days, and we appreciate you spending the time with us. But again, Sean, thank you. Thanks, Semperis team, and look forward to speaking with everybody on the call. Thank you.
My pleasure. It was really great to spend a few minutes with you today.
Yep. Have a great day, everyone.